Dysart O'Dea is a unique site. It's a small site tucked away in green farmland between Ennis and Corofin. And you don't see it from the main roads, but it encapsulates some of the most extraordinary developments in Irish history. And in the standing remains that are still around us here today, mostly ruins, we can trace the history of this place. Firstly, in the first period of development, you have the early Christian monastery developed by St. Tola, which flourished here for several hundred years before the first millennium. Tola was a very mobile saint, and he established many monasteries all over Ireland. The name Tola is one of the most ubiquitous among the Irish saints. And in the monastery here, we still have typical elements of an Irish monastery, we'll say, at its peak in the 10th century. The most important of these, of course, is the round tower, which you can see jutting up behind the church building here. Later on, in the 12th century, Dysart O'Dea became part of the great reforms of that period, when the old monastery was swept away and a new parish was made. And this is reflected in the new nave and chancel church, which you can see here, and it's reflected also in the extraordinary, dazzling Romanesque decoration around the central doorway. And it's most of all, and most visually fascinating of all, is the high cross which you see out in the field. A very late high cross, believed to be 12th century. Later on, when the Reformation spread to this part of the country, in as late as the early 17th century, Dysart O'Dea became a Protestant parish for a very short space of time, because the population of worshippers didn't justify it and it fell into ruin. In the 19th century, Dysart is once again in the news because the landlord of all the land around here, a man called Edward Singh, he was very involved in the evangelical movement in the Protestant church, and in an extraordinary episode, he tried to force his tenants to become Protestants. They were all Catholics, by threatening them with eviction if they didn't. And this was a controversy which went on through the 1820s. At one stage, Singh was shot by an assassin, or a would-be assassin, and was saved by reason of the fact that he had a Bible in his breast pocket. And this is all part of the richness, the extraordinary richness of this amazing site. The main doorway here in Dysart O'Dea Church, in the 12th century nave and chancel church, is a dazzling example of Irish Romanesque. Romanesque originated in Europe about the millennium, and as it was imported into Ireland slowly, as part of the 12th century reforms, it assumed a particularly Irish shape. And you can see all of these animal heads here in the outer order, the animal heads mixed in with the human heads. Archaeologists have recently begun to wonder if these human heads actually relate to individual people, which seems to be increasingly the consensus. And if you look at the decoration, the extraordinary chevrons and lozenge shapes here mixed in with this interlace, you'll see that none of it fits. It has actually come from different structures in different churches in different parts of this region, which adds to the mystery of it. It's patched and repatched and changed, as indeed the whole fabric of this church has been over hundreds of years. And around the church, particularly around the back here, you'll see carved stones again, which don't match anything in terms of this particular decoration. It's really quite extraordinary and adds to the interest of this incredible ecclesiastical site. This wall plaque here marks the tomb of Michael O'Dea of Dysart O'Dea. And it was erected here by Michael in 1684 for his wife Joan Butler, and it identifies other members of his family. It identifies his father, Conor Crone O'Dea. Clearly, Michael was proud of his father and of his family. The inscription, the tomb, shows that Michael O'Dea of Dysart, descendant of a distinguished family, the O'Deas, whose ancestry went way back to the 12th century in this locality as lords of this area, that their pride was still intact after the tremendous upheavals which the family, in common with the whole country, underwent throughout the ages. In 1683, he repaired the cross of St. Ola, which stands outside in the field here, and he added his name to its base as the repairer of this structure, which would have been very important to his family. Now, what all that tells us is that Michael O'D, descendant of a very distinguished Gaelic learned family, ecclesiastical family, at the end of centuries of troubles, which had seen his family's importance diminish increasingly, was still conscious of his ancestry, and he was still here. He and his family were still here. And if you look at the 17th century land records, they show us that at the beginning of the century, the O'Ds owned the land here. By the end of the century, they're tenants on the land. Other people own it, but the O'Ds are still here. For me, it's this high cross that encapsulates the fascination of Dysart O'D. If you look at it, nothing fits. The stones on the bottom clearly come from another structure. Even they don't match each other. The base here is obviously much later. You have the inscription from 1683 by Michael O'D. On the other side, you have the inscription of Edward Hutchinson Synge, who re-erected it in 1871. And then you have the shaft here. The two parts of it don't match either. And the cross here would have been extended on both sides. The holes where the metal bars would have held the extended cross, they testified to what was once here. And here there's a little socket where the arm of St. Tola, a decorated shrine, was sometimes placed in medieval times on the saint's feast day, we presume. So nothing matches, nothing is right. It testifies to a history of disturbance, of continual survival, rebuilding, repatching that you get right through the whole complex. And it's this that makes Dysart O'D such an extraordinary gem.